Welcome back. In this tutorial we're going to carry on with making our drum kit from a sliced beatbox sample, and here we're going to have a look at creating a clap style percussive sound. Now the reason I'm saying clap style and not just calling it a clap is because I'm not actually trying to recreate the kind of clap you might find in a drum machine like a Roland 909 or anything like that, for example. Really I'm just going to try and make the best of what we have here in this beatbox sample, because the sound is fairly close as it is, and we're just going to use some of the settings on the simpler, such as the envelope settings and the filter, and we're also going to add some effects, both as inserts and as send effects. So we're not going to change the sound really that much. What we're going to look at is what we can do with the existing sound that'll make it more interesting and more usable. I actually quite like using sounds like this that are just recordings of any kind of just vocal noises or whatever with noise in the background, mainly because it gives some real character, and you can actually do quite a lot with these kind of sounds. So the first thing we're going to do is, using the set we already started where we created the kick in the last tutorial, we're going to take the clip we used to preview the sample to save us having to keep re-triggering it. We're going to change that to the clap sound from the kick sound. So that's on slice 5 in this particular example, so we're just going to move that up to slice 5. And as you can hear, that's quite a bit louder than the kick was, so we're going to have to turn that down a bit. Select slice 5, and you can see from looking at the waveform that it's a lot louder than the other beats, so it needs to come down a fair bit. Okay, now if we trigger the clip, then that'll keep it looping so that we can edit it. Okay, well the first thing I'm going to do is to change some of the volume envelope settings. And you can see by these green dots that they're already mapped to the macros, which happened by default when we sliced the sample because we used the built-in setting, and these are the settings that are mapped by default. So we're going to have to unmap these, which is a little bit tedious, but in a later tutorial we'll have a look at setting up our own presets, so you won't have to do that in the future. But for now, we'll just unmap each of these. Now we're probably only going to use the decay, sustain and maybe release, but we'll unmap all of them anyway, just in case. And the first thing we're going to do is, just like we did with the kick, we'll turn the sustain all the way down. And you can hear straight away that makes it sound a bit shorter. It basically allows us to control how quickly the sound fades out. And you can hear that even when we turn it all the way up, it still sounds a little bit clipped. And that's because this was sliced to 16ths. So every single region is exactly 1/16th of the loop that we sliced. So that might mean some of the beats have been cut short a bit because they might decay for slightly longer than a 16th. So by fixing that, we're now allowing the sound to decay more naturally, so that if we do turn the decay all the way up, then it will sound more natural. So the next thing I'm going to do is add a filter by pressing this button here, and I'm going to add a high pass 12 and set the frequency to somewhere in the region of 600 to 700 Hertz. Turn the resonance up a fair bit. I find this makes it sound quite punchy. It's quite good for a clap, the frequencies in this range, and kind of makes it sound a little bit similar to some of the claps you might find on a drum machine, like the Roland 909. And already, just with these few small changes, we can already hear that it's starting to take a bit more shape as a clap sound. I mean, that in itself is almost quite usable, depending on the track you're working on. Okay, the next thing I want to do is actually have a bit of a play with the loop settings. But you can see again they're mapped to macros by the green dots, so we're going to have to unmap those so that we have independent control that isn't affected by the macros. And make sure you unmap these two buttons as well. So we're going to need to turn the loop button on, and we'll leave the snap button turned off. That will snap to 0 crossings, and that'll limit the sounds we can create with this loop setting. So if we turn the loop setting down a bit, not the length setting, we'll put that back up to 100. Just turn the loop setting down to somewhere around 20 to 30%. And you can hear that kind of repeats it, so it makes the sound a bit longer. Now if we pull the decay back, so that when it gets to about there, you can't really hear that it's looping. It just sounds like there's a bit more of a decay to the actual sound. And these loop settings can be quite fun to play around with, actually. You can make the sound quite different. I quite like this sort of synthetic sound you can end up with. It can be quite useful for some sort of electro or electro breaks sort of tracks. It makes it sound really kind of synthetic or robotic. And you can hear that by changing the size of the loop, that you can also change the pitch, because it's looping much higher speed, so it changes the pitch of the sound as well. And I like to actually automate a lot of these settings, so you just hit record and start turning some of these knobs, and then it gives a track some real movement. You know, you get some real changes throughout the track. But if we just settle for now on leaving it at the end here by turning the length all the way up, then that just has the effect of giving it a bit of a tail and giving it a more of a decay than is naturally in this particular sample. Okay, well the next thing we're going to do is add some send effects. And the sends in the drum racks can be accessed via the chain list view, which you enable by pressing this button here. And you can see that the send and return buttons have appeared at the bottom here. But the send button is actually greyed out, and that's because there's nothing yet in the returns drop zone here. So first thing we're going to do is drag a reverb to that drop zone. And you can see now that this column here, send A, has appeared in the chain list view. So if we go down and look at slice 5, then we can now turn this send setting up and you can hear that reverb. And just doing that adds quite a bit more depth, makes it sound quite nice. I'm just going to quickly change to another clip that's got the kick playing so we can hear it more in context. Okay, if we just go and turn that send up a little bit more, you can hear there's quite a bit of decay in that sound now. But I don't really want that much decay, and I don't want to use the decay setting on the reverb either to turn it off, so I'm going to use a gate plugin. Just drag it straight to the reverb chain here. You can also drag it to directly after the reverb if you want to. And you can see with the default setting of -12 on the gate that it cuts the tail off completely. And we don't want it to do that, we want a little bit of the tail. So we're going to just turn that up a bit. And you can hear now we've got that reverb sound, but it's gating really tightly, so it gives the clap a lot more power now. You can turn the release up a little bit, and that gives it a little bit of a decay, but still keeps it nice and tight. And if we now turn this decay up on the reverb, but actually drop the threshold back up a bit, then you can see that makes the reverb sound a bit fuller, but it still keeps it nice and tight because it's cut off by the gate. I quite like this on a clap. It gives it a real kind of power. It makes it sound quite big. We add the decay here. Turn the loop off because we're not using that at the moment really. We've got this other decay happening, so you can hear that's made it sound really big. It's probably a different type of clap to what we had before, but it's really quite a nice sound. But by turning the decay up, we've now made the reverb a lot louder, so the gate isn't closing as quickly, so it's letting more of that reverb through. So you just need to be a little bit aware of that. If you start changing some of the settings on the reverb or on the chain itself, or the send settings, then you could need to readjust the gate. Okay, now we're going to add some insert effects to slice 5. First of all, we're going to use the simple delay, and what we're going to use that for is to create a kind of a flam effect. Now, I'm not really trying to create a realistic flam, but this is kind of inspired by the 909 clap, which if you look at the waveform, and we've got one here, just quickly have a look at. If you have a look at the waveform here, it actually looks like there's a few beats in that sound. Like it's got a few peaks there. They play very quickly, so you don't hear them as though they're separate beats. If we just trigger that, all it does is create a kind of a flamming effect. So we're not going to try and recreate that, but what we're going to do is kind of try something that's inspired by that, by using the simple delay plugin. So if we go to the browser and just drag a simple delay straight to slice 5, we could also drag it to after the simpler, or we could even drag it straight to the pad in the drum rack pad view. First thing we'll do is press the link button, and we can just create a mono flamming effect. So we'll turn off the sync button, and we'll just trigger the clip. You can hear at first it just has a quite noticeable delay, but if we pull that delay time down, you can hear it's getting tighter. But when we get down here, it creates a bit more of a flamming effect. It's very quick, you almost wouldn't notice it's there, it just makes it sound a lot bigger. But I like to take it one step further and use it to create a bit of a stereo effect as well. Let's just stop this. So if we go and now turn off the link button, and we have a left and right channel that we can use separately, and we turn off the sync button again on the right channel, and we'll trigger the clip again. And if we pull this back here, we can hear straight away there's this nice big stereo wide effect. But if we pull that down to sort of around 40 somewhere, then it's still quite subtle, but you can hear both of them, but it still has a bit of a flamming effect, but it's nice and wide and stereo. And just like we were playing with the loop settings over here, you can create a kind of similar effect by playing with the feedback setting in the delay here. And if you turn this up, you can hear it creates quite a nice synthetic sort of sound. But we've still got that stereo effect going because we've got the two channels at different delay times. Now this is another one I really like to automate and change in real time. Gives a track a real movement if you can move these about a bit as the track progresses. Or you could just leave it there and it creates a really kind of electronic sounding clap or snare type sound. And if we then start turning the delay time down a bit with the feedback setting up, then that creates this kind of flanging sound as well. Because basically a flanger is just a very short delay. And this again is really nice to automate because it gives some real movement to a track. Okay, well the next thing we're going to add is a saturator plugin. Now we can literally drag that again straight to slice 5 to the chain, and it's inserted after the simple delay. First thing I'm going to do is turn the output volume down by a fair bit. You can very easily hurt your ears with the saturator once you start turning the drive up. And we're also going to turn the dry wet back a bit so the whole signal isn't completely saturated. And I'm going to go for the sinoid fold setting here. And turn the drive up a bit. And also the soft clip setting here, this is very useful because that stops it going for the output of the saturator going above 0 dB. So it's basically a simple limiter. And it's very useful with the saturator because you can very easily get quite loud very quickly. Now the saturator is a plugin that I actually use all the time on pretty much everything. But on a clap, I don't know, it really depends on the track. On this particular sound, maybe I wouldn't actually use it. It makes it sound quite aggressive as you can hear here, but that might be what you're after for the track, so it totally depends on the track. It's definitely a plugin that's worth considering. In fact, like I said, I use it on most things really, because it's so versatile, you can do a lot with it. But on this particular clap sound, unless you're after that particularly aggressive sound, then I probably wouldn't use it. So for now, I might just turn it off. I'm quite happy with the sounds I'm getting with the other plugins and settings. But another plugin that's always very useful is the compressor. If we just drag one from the browser straight to after the saturator here, the compressor will even out the sound, and it'll bring out some of the tones that might be obscured by some of the more dominant frequencies. So if we just trigger that clip again, and already you can hear that because the volume has been raised a bit, then the threshold isn't closing as quickly on the gate that's on that reverb. So more of that reverb is coming through. And you could actually use that creatively so that when you turn the volume up, then you also simultaneously get a big reverb sound. So you can hear that the compressor's made it sound a bit punchier. It's kind of brought it out a bit more. And that might help as well. If you were going to use the saturator, then the compressor helps that a lot. Evens out the sound, makes it sound a bit tighter and punchier. But again, I'm not going to use that here. I'm quite happy with all the other sounds. So if we go back through some of them, now that we've added all these effects as well, you can hear the overall sound now. It's really coming together. If we play with the loop settings again, that's really starting to sound quite nice. And when using this kind of loop setting that sounds really quite sort of electronic like that, then maybe the saturator actually comes in quite handy here. Now I'm quite liking that. That to me sounds quite usable. I'd use a clap like that definitely, or a snare sound like that. Again, it depends totally on the track you're doing, but you know, that's something I would definitely consider using, maybe in a breakbeat track or something like that. And you can see we really haven't done that much. We've just added a few effects, and with a few very subtle changes, we've actually managed to make quite a difference to the original sound. So one last thing I'm just going to quickly go over. This only applies to people who actually own the sampler instrument. So if you are lucky enough to own Sampler, then all you need to do is right click on the Simpler, or hold Control and click if you've got a one button mouse, and choose Simpler to Sampler. You can see that converts it to a sampler. We go to the Pitch OSC tab. Now this section here is quite in depth and could have at least one tutorial about it on its own. So we're not going to go too in depth with this. We're just going to really use it in a very basic way. And for this particular sound, it'll only really have one particular effect on it anyway. We won't be able to change it around much, but we can get a really nice sound with it. So we start by enabling the oscillator by pressing the OSC button. Change the type to noise. And we'll just trigger that clip and turn the volume up to about -17 or something. Now you can hear that sounds quite synthetic and quite nice. It actually could quite easily be a drum machine. And I quite like that. Even without the effects, we turn the saturator off. And even the delay. Just on its own like that, that's quite a nice sound. Very usable. Okay, well that's pretty much it. Thanks for watching.